I've been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape. Great Expectations, Charles Dickens. This is one of my favorite novels by my favorite author. So let's shrink Great Expectations. Now, for anyone who has not read Great Expectations, first of all, I apologize, but this video will contain spoilers. Perhaps at some point I may post one which doesn't. But for the time being, if that is a deal breaker for you, I encourage you to click off this video, but only if you take a moment and get on your Kindle app and buy Great Expectations. Only costs $1. It's worth it. Or you can run to a secondhand bookstore. You can buy it for less than $5. There's no excuse to delay reading Great Expectations. Without further ado, I think it'd be best to give a quick synopsis for those who haven't read Great Expectations in a while. We first meet Pip in the graveyard. Pip is visiting the graves of his mother and father. Pip lives with his uncle and aunt. His aunt is a heavy-handed woman and often prides herself in her ability to raise Pip by hand. And Joe is a very dear and ironically gentle blacksmith. Him and Pip are great friends. Now, when Pip is young, he meets a convict in the graveyard while he's visiting his parents. He helps that convict, not by his own choice, but under threat of his life and liver and fat cheeks that he didn't want to be eaten. He doesn't see the convict again. After some time, then Pip is called on by a wealthy woman named Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham is a very bizarre woman. Miss Havisham has never been married. When he meets Miss Havisham, he's surprised by the fact that she is in a tattered old wedding dress, and she is pale and thin as a skeleton. However, she has a beautiful daughter named Estella. Pip spends some time with Miss Havisham and Estella. During this time, he falls in love with Estella, but Estella is a very mean young girl. After time passes, then he is no longer needed at Miss Havisham's, and he is expected to take up his apprenticeship with old Joe at the forge. Now, this makes Pip kind of sad because in his time with Miss Havisham and Estella, then he's started to feel a little bit embarrassed by his humble and poor upbringings and his rough hands, as Estella calls them. So he's not too excited when he's told that he is going to be apprenticed to Joe, even though Joe is his great friend. His real dream is, as he tells his dear friend Biddy, is to become a gentleman. And so one day he's elated. He's delighted to find that he's come into some great expectations, meaning a sort of inheritance, if you would, from a mysterious and unknown benefactor, who he believes to be Miss Havisham. So he thanks Miss Havisham. She does not deny that it was her, but she does not confirm it either. However, she does say that he must continue to go by the name of Pip. So for the rest of his adult life, he continues to go by Pip instead of Philip. Pip then moves on and he moves into London, and he works at a house of law in which he makes some friends and some new acquaintances. And over time, he starts to hope that he will be able to be with Estella because Miss Havisham has given him these great expectations. However, you don't find out that until later in the story, and this is where the spoilers come in, that later in this story, he finds that his great expectations came from none but the escaped convict that he helped as a child. Pip is devastated to hear this, and it's actually really unfortunate because the escaped convict had hoped to give Pip a better life. In doing so, he saved some money and he gave it all to Pip so that he could have the life that Pip wanted. But shocked and appalled by the fact that his inheritance came from a criminal instead of Miss Havisham, then he starts to lose appreciation for the great expectations and the opportunity he's been given, and begins to question, in a sense, his life. They start to try to figure out what to do with the convict because he is on the run yet again. He was captured and is now on the run again. In short, the story ends with Pip, a single man, never married to Estella, never to be married to Estella. He's run out of his great expectations, and he's now doing his best to make it as a humble worker in a law shop. Now, let me start this by explaining that I actually had my brother read this story, and it was funny to me because he told me, he's like, okay, look, it's not a bad book, but I don't like Pip. And that kind of caught me off guard because I hadn't thought about that really. But I honestly don't think you're supposed to like him per se, but you're also supposed to understand where he's coming from. Pip was a young boy who came into great expectations. And as a part of these great expectations, he expected to become a gentleman and marry a beautiful woman and live happily ever after. What I think Charles Dickens is trying to tell us is that life doesn't always work this way. It doesn't always work that what you expect is what you get. And sometimes having great expectations closes your eyes to the great realities that are in front of you. Pip had a great uncle. He was a father figure to him, and they were great friends. Pip also had an opportunity to date and perhaps even marry a great young woman who was Biddy. They had a great relationship. But because Pip was so focused on the chance to be a gentleman and be able to be with Estella, who was only ever hard to him and mean, well, then he lost his opportunity to not just be a gentleman, but also find love with Biddy and Estella. And I think it's important to note as well that just because the Great Expectations came from a criminal instead of a woman who was wealthy, that shouldn't, by nature of itself, have changed what he had done with his expectations. But it did, because he started to question everything. He started to question where it came from. And he started to question what was the point of him having it. This led him to, in a sense, lose everything, because his expectations were so high that he did not take advantage of what he had in front of him. He did not take advantage of reality. Let's talk for a moment about relationships and the psychology involved in Pip's desired relationship with Estella. If we're to take a Freudian approach to this, what Freud would say is that Pip is by nature going to try to seek out someone who is like his mother. I made a video about this on another channel. If you want a more in-depth discussion on the Oedipus complex, check it out there. But in short, let me start by explaining. The Oedipus complex is not about wanting to have sex with your mother. It's wanting to find someone who reminds you of your mother because your mother, it was the first person to love you. We'll leave it at that for this. And so now Pip, being an orphan, he has two issues. One is he has the, I guess you could call it the ghost of love, which would have come from his mother, the mother that he did not get to know. And so he has a view of love that is unattainable. He also has a mother figure, which was his aunt who raised him by hand. So he may have a tendency to seek out a woman who will be mean to him. And we see both of these come true in his life as he seeks out Estella. Estella was a woman, was a young girl who became a woman that was not only mean to him, but also someone that he was unable to attain love with. Estella hits him several different times in the book, tries to make him cry, and finds joy in this, which is, you could say this is akin to he's seeking out a person that is somewhat like his aunt, someone that makes him not necessarily feel safe, but yet someone who doesn't leave him. But he also, unfortunately, never gets to be with Estella, which is, in a sense, like seeking the love that he never attained from his real mother. And now let's look at Estella for a moment. Estella is raised by Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham was a woman who was left at the altar. Miss Havisham never moved on in her life. From the moment that Meriwether Compton just ditched her, then her life never moved on. She stayed in the same wedding dress from all those years ago. And even the clocks in the house were stuck at, I believe, 9:20. So it's no wonder that Miss Havisham develops a disdain for love and, I believe, for men in general. What Miss Havisham does to get back at love and the male race is she raises her daughter. She raises her adopted daughter, Estella, to, in a sense, be a weapon of love. Now, aside from endlessly counseling Pip to seek out and love Estella, she tells him, love her, though she's mean to you. She then later in the story tells him, she says, I stole her heart away and put ice in its place. Now, what a terrible thing to do to a young girl. She did this by each day convincing Estella that love was something unattainable, that if she sought out true love, then she would end up like Miss Havisham herself. Nobody wants to end up a old woman who lives in an old tattered wedding dress in a mansion where the clocks have not moved on, just like she has not. Now, I think it's important to point out that what happens to Estella is, in a sense, she makes Estella into someone who is incapable of love. But then she's surprised when Estella is not only incapable of love towards men, but towards Miss Havisham as well. This comes true when Estella tells Miss Havisham later in the book, I am what you designed me to be. I am your blade. You cannot now complain if you also feel the hurt. Miss Havisham didn't understand that in corrupting Estella's view of love, it also corrupted her view of the world, which does not just destroy Miss Havisham and seeing that her daughter, the one person that was supposed to love her back in the end, is now not only incapable of love towards all men, but seemingly towards all people. Now there is an interesting dialogue that happens in about the middle of the book, where Pip confronts Estella about loving a man who is, in his words, just simply terrible. Terrible for her, a terrible human being, all of that. She responds, as I paraphrase, by saying, "I don't love him. I'm simply toying with him. Would you rather that I do the same to you?" And this surprises him. And I believe what Dickens was trying to say in this scenario is that Estella does, in a sense, love Pip, but she doesn't know how to handle that. She doesn't know how to love somebody, and she is afraid. You could say she has an insecure attachment. She's unable to love somebody and be in a real relationship because she fears that if she gives her heart to somebody, then she will end up like Miss Havisham did and end up unhappy and miserable in the end. And so instead, she removed her heart and replaced it with ice, as Miss Havisham mentions. And this leads both Pip and Estella to both end up single and unhappy in the end. Charles Dickens does leave a potential for them to end up together, but that's for the reader to decide. And now that's, in essence, the relationship or the romantic relationships in Great Expectations. Next, let's talk about not seeing what's before your eyes. I think what's most painful for me in this story is how Pip treats old Joe, his only true friend from the beginning. Once Pip starts to meet Estella and Miss Havisham, there's an encounter when Estella laughs at him for his rough hands and his inability to speak and read well. This makes Pip sad and uncomfortable and ashamed of his upbringing, because the young girl that he hopes to love one day and be with forever, a symbol of his hopes and aspirations for his future, is telling him that because of your upbringing, you will never get what you want in life. And this in turn makes Pip a little bit resentful towards old Joe. And now this is unfortunate because old Joe has only ever done his best to give Pip the best life he knew how. And unfortunately for old Joe and Pip, old Joe's not the most socially aware, I guess you could say. This is strikingly demonstrated when Miss Havisham calls Pip and old Joe to meet with her. And the entirety of the conversation, when Miss Havisham is talking straight to old Joe the whole time, old Joe can't help but respond to Miss Havisham's every word by turning to Pip and saying something like, "Oh, well, of course you knew this, Pip," as if it was Pip who was speaking to him and not Miss Havisham. There's lots of reasons it could just be literary fun. I think I choose to believe that it was old Joe's attempts to simply do his best in a social situation which he was unprepared for. He was a humble blacksmith who had never expected to be in the presence of a woman of such high class if you could call it that. She does live in a mansion. And so I think he was nervous and scared and very, very socially awkward. Now, the sad thing is that Pip begins to resent old Joe and his upbringing and his rough hands. And so much so that when Pip is given his expectations, that he feels even embarrassed to wear his new clothes, his fancy clothes, his suits, not only just in town, but also around old Joe and his aunt and poor Biddy. This resentment leads Pip to begin to lose his relationship with Biddy, old Joe, and his aunt. He doesn't visit them as often as he says he would. He doesn't write them. And in a sense, he nearly cuts ties with them. And that's one of the tragedies of the story, is that he leaves his family for a dream of better things when the best things were right in front of him the whole time. Now, old Joe, he always does his best to stay friends with him and be close with him, but he does begin to realize that Pip is embarrassed by him. And this makes old Joe sad, but it doesn't make him upset or angry. He at one point comes to Pip and talks to him a little bit awkwardly and not like they used to, because he sees that there is such a divide between himself and Pip now, and refuses to stay longer than was necessary to deliver a message, because he understands now that Pip has effectively moved on in his life and doesn't want to, as the expression goes, rub elbows with a dirty old blacksmith. And now it's interesting because Pip's great expectations are never fully realized. He ends the story by, in a sense, being unhappy. He's doing his best to... He keeps his job, but at what cost? He keeps his job, but he is loveless. His best friend, who's his age, is married and happy. But Pip is single and alone and doesn't seem to have any prospects of developing the life he expected to have anytime soon. And I believe that's because he didn't look at what was in front of him the whole time. He didn't look at an opportunity to have a great life by potentially marrying Biddy and staying with his friend old Joe. Sure, it would have been a humble life, but there's nothing wrong with a humble life. This is in part because Pip becomes fixated on dreams and hopes and expectations. This is kind of beautifully described in this quote from the book. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you, but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day. In a sense, what he's saying is that when you become transfixed or chained by some sort of a great expectation, it doesn't matter if it's a expectation of greatness or an expectation of doom, in a sense, a chain of iron or a chain of gold, a chain of thorns or a chain of flowers. If you're so fixed on what could happen in the future, you are going to miss what is available to you right now. There's so much more I could talk about in Great Expectations. That's why it's a classic, and that's why it's one of my favorite novels. But in summary, I suppose my understanding of Great Expectations is it is important to live in the moment. It's important to not be so focused on things to come, so focused on what you don't have, that you lose sight of what you do have and what you can have. Don't stay focused on tomorrow. Focus on today. Something I always say is you can only control what you can control, and don't worry about the rest. If you can't take care of what's going to happen tomorrow, there's no sense worrying about it. Take care of what you can do today. And that's what Pip misses. Pip spends the entirety of his young adult life focusing so much on his expectations, and that if he just gets to earn a little bit more, then perhaps he'll be worthy of Estella, when that was never going to happen. To anyone listening, don't go chasing after Estellas. Be content with old Joe and Biddy. Be content with your life, poor as it may be or rich as it may be. This does not mean don't try to improve. Pip's life could have been great. He could have even potentially become a gentleman if he focused on his roots. If he allowed himself to focus on what he had, not simply what he wished that he had. He could have taken his expectations, become a gentleman, and maintained a positive relationship with Joe and Biddy and his aunt. But instead, he lost sight of them, he lost connection, and in the end of the book, they do reconcile, but time lost is time lost. It can't be regained. And it's sad to me to think about how much better Pip's life could have been if he didn't allow himself to be chasing the dream that was Estella. Pip says, I loved her against reason, against promise, against peace, against hope, against happiness, against all discouragement that could be. He fell in love not just with Estella, but with a thought, with a dream, with a life that was not what he hoped it would be. And when he came close to attaining that life and realized the life was a fable, then it was too late. The opportunity was gone, and he now had to, in a sense, start over. When all the while he could have taken the time and built his relationship with Joe and built his relationship with Biddy and used those great expectations, and not caring where they came from, not caring what the promise may be, but use them to develop a better life. He could have been a good friend to the old convict that gave him this great start. But instead, he was ashamed of him up until the end, and he then realized he should have been better to him. Wrapping it up with one of my favorite quotes from the book. Suffering has been stronger than all other teachings and has taught me to understand what your heart used to be. I have been bent and broken, but I hope into a better shape. Now, was Pip bent and broken into a better shape? I don't know, but are any of us? And that's what we need to focus on, is that through our life, we may be bent and we may be broken, but let's focus on each day being bent and broken into a better shape and not into a worse one. Anyways, thank you for watching. This has been Shrinking Classics. If you like this video, please like and comment below and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you, and we'll see what we're shrinking next time. Thank you, and we'll see what we're shrinking next time.